Now, when you think sustainability, you think of environmental goals, right? But Christina's saying that it's about business growth, driving real value. So that's what we want to talk about today. Christina Shim, she is the Chief Sustainability Officer with IBM. So I feel like there are two ways to go, right? So you can go with how to make AI more sustainable, or you can go with how to use AI for sustainability. So let's start with the first one, because you hear so much about tech companies, right, and reporting increased emissions to run the data centers for AI. But you're saying that a lot of these companies use these large language models. But you say you don't have to go big. Yeah. You can use small, more efficient models.
Yeah, exactly. So we think of this in 4 different ways. I think there's different levers that you can use to make sure that you're thinking about using technology more broadly, but AI in the most sustainable way possible. And I love how you started also with sustainability is not a goal. I always joke that I think the old school way of thinking about sustainability is, oh, let's make sure that we turn off the lights, or let's make sure that we're recycling more. Increasingly, there's so much data about, hey, let's think about this from the perspective of a foundation of growth rather than as a goal. So when we talk about AI, what does that mean in terms of how we can make this a more sustainable pathway forward? And again, 4 ways to think about it. So one is the size of the model. We don't need to use a trillion parameter model if you have a very specific use case that you're working towards. You can have a more targeted and use-efficient model that can get you more and be able to use a lot less energy and have a lot more cost effectiveness as you're doing that. So that's one, is the size of the model. 2 is around how you're thinking about locating your processing, right? So when you're thinking about all of the energy that you're using, it's going back to, as you mentioned, the data centers that are processing all of that data. Is your data center that you're using being run on oil and gas or on coal or renewable, or what sort of power are you using, right? And how far is it in terms of location? Because that's going to make a huge difference in terms of, the scale of how you're thinking about the energy and cost efficiencies as well. So the location of your processing is going to be very important as well. So that's 2. 3 is around your infrastructure. So the last panel, someone spoke about just infrastructure and making sure that you're investing in kind of the most recent up-to-date infrastructure. There is infrastructure now that is AI specific. And that makes a huge difference. We've seen data points where you're talking about 10, 12, 20 times more energy efficiency and cost efficiencies if you're using AI-specific infrastructure. And then lastly is open source. So we are firm believers of the open source community, right? It really increases innovation, it increases collaboration. And we've seen with some of our models too, that things that normally took months took weeks, if not days, once we opened it up to the open source community. So that also allows for faster processing, faster effectiveness, and it's also happening in a much shorter amount of time, so you're using a lot less energy as part of that. So those 4 elements are very tactical. They're very tangible for any business to think about when you're thinking about the uses of AI, and that's how we're working with our partners on this as well.
Everybody's taking notes.
Think about just like the full stack of AI, right? You're thinking about everything from the infrastructure and the chips through to the model itself, right? And then, as you mentioned, the application of it. But I think if you think about the full stack of AI, you can really be intentional about how you're thinking about mitigating for that.
Now, you mentioned data. So kind of it's the key to knowing how much energy you're consuming, how much energy you're wasting. Is that correct?
Yeah. Data is everything, right? For all, it's going to make or break how you decide your 80-20, right? How do you make sure that you understand where you can make the biggest actions for the biggest bang for your buck? And so, for example, we were trying to figure out, we had about 600 data points that we were looking at in order to really understand our footprint more broadly, right? That's everything from HR and other technology platforms to like what's going on with your buildings and where people are sitting and what vehicles are being used for the business, et cetera, right? So all of these data points, all in different platforms across, for us, hundreds and hundreds of locations around the world. And so it's really difficult to have it as one, if you want to say, like single source of truth. But if you're able to do that in a platform, which we use our own platform for, it's called Invisi, you are able to then have that single source of truth and be able to understand what the data is telling you. Like, what are the quick insights that you have? And then how do you action on that in a way that you can understand where your biggest footprint is, where your biggest cost drivers are, and then take action from there. Most organizations are still using spreadsheets, and it's really challenging because you cannot really get the insights needed if you're still using spreadsheets. Yeah.
To get out of that. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's move on to the next topic, how to use AI for sustainability.
Sure.
So what are some examples you can give? How are businesses finding that useful?
Yeah, I like to give 3 examples here because I think they're really different across different industries. So one is we partnered with NASA and built a geospatial foundation model, which I think is one of a kind. We're actually increasing that partnership and adding the European Space Agency onto this as well. This is one where we were able to work with the United Arab Emirates government in identifying heat zones around their country. And as you can imagine, if there are heat zones in particular areas, it's really affecting like the health and the well-being of the communities there, as well as all the businesses that are in that community. They're really, suffering in terms of their energy consumption, et cetera. And so with that identification, we were able to work with them. They created policies that decreased those heat zones and the temperature there by 3 degrees centigrade over 18 months. And I don't know about you, 18 months in terms of like you combine science with policy is pretty incredible amount of time where you see that kind of drastic reduction. So that's one. Geospatial foundation models, I think, is an amazing use case for AI.
Okay.
Another one, we actually just announced a partnership with L'Oreal. And this is using our AI technologies to create more sustainable chemical formulations for their cosmetics. So something that anybody can understand. I think also a very cool use case, something that would have taken a lot longer using classical computing. We're thinking about also from a quantum perspective, but so many amazing things that can really come from a chemical formulation and like a consumer product perspective as well. And then the last one is one that we worked with a bridge and tunnel company out in Europe. And they have one of the longest bridges in the world. And we worked with them to have AI analysis using drone technology. And this allowed for more predictive maintenance, monitoring, and health of this bridge and provided 2% year-on-year operational cost reductions, I should say, yes. It allowed for extension of the life of this bridge by 100 years and saved 750,000 metric tons of carbon dioxide. So, I mean, when we talk about like, hey, look, this is just good business. It's not about this side goal that you have. Great, we saved a lot in terms of carbon emissions, but you're talking about real cost savings. You're talking about real, safety of the people who have to go up on the bridges without having to do that. You're talking about, the way to do this in a predictive way. It's pretty powerful.
Well, so 3 completely different examples.
Totally different.
Totally
Yes,
different examples.
yes.
So you're saying companies can make a difference and make a profit at the same time?
I think this is the dichotomy we need to move away from, which is that, again, sustainability is not a goal. It's just good foundation for growth, right? You think about it as how do I make my business more sustainable in a way where we can ensure the resilience of it and the relevance of it in the next generation. And so we've done studies as well as many other management consulting companies and other like think tanks that have shown data that, for example, those that really embed sustainability as part of their business will show 52% increase in profitability and 16% revenue growth because it really fosters innovation as well. So this is not even just cost savings, which I think a lot of people will say, oh, okay, let's save on gas or let's save on electricity, let's reduce costs. Yes, there's that. There's also the revenue generation as well. There's a growth factor here. It's a growth enabler.
Excellent.
Yeah.
Now, talk about the internal workings. So you're part of an AI ethics board on IBM.
Yes.
So is that something that companies have to consider, starting these boards? I mean, is that an effective way to start?
Yes. So I loved that the previous panel touched on this. I mean, look, the potential and transformative ability of AI is incredible. I've mentioned a few use cases that I think showcase that, but there are definitely reasons why we need to make sure that we are governing and thinking about AI in an ethical way. And so IBM, and we actually started this AI ethics board 5 years ago. So it was before, I would say, like the hype of AI, but AI has been around for whatever, for those of you who know. So it was started 5 years ago, but it's really transformed over the last few years. It's made up of members from all around the company, literally everyone from like legal to folks in the business to engineers who are coding to folks like myself. And the idea is that you're bringing together diverse perspectives that are identifying potential issues with client use cases. So what is our technology being used for? And are we okay with that, or are we not? It's usually not so black and white. Some things are a little bit more, but it's really gray, right? And as the technology is moving and evolving so rapidly, it is, we used to have maybe like one use case come up every couple months here and there. Now it's like, constant. It's constant. But it's amazing because I think it also shows how important the company is taking this. And I do think, to your point, that it is something that every company that's involved in this should be thinking about. How do we stand behind what the technology is being used for, and how are we thinking about that in terms of the use cases for our specific organization?
And when we spoke, it was actually the day the whole DeepSeek, thing happened.
Yes.
And it was a crazy day. The markets were all over the place. But it just goes to show you how fast something can switch and
100%.
change, just like that. Now, what about, DeepSeek? The whole thing was the more affordable, the affordability contact of it. What about smaller companies? Are they in a good place?
Yeah, DeepSeek, it's interesting because, that's right, the day that we talked, yes. So it really affirms the way that we have been thinking about this going forward. I mean, even from before, we focused on, as I mentioned, kind of like targeted, use-efficient models, and DeepSeek has really proven that out. And so, yes, I think that what we're seeing in the industry is that the productivity ability of these models is skyrocketing while the costs and efficiencies are decreasing, right? And so that's a pretty powerful combination. You're seeing like the ability to do more with less. And so with that comes greater sustainability for the models themselves, and it also comes with greater cost efficiencies, right? Which also makes it more, if you want to say, a democratized technology where smaller companies will be able to use them increasingly as well. It won't be just something that enterprises and large organizations can use, because as it gets cheaper and cheaper, as technology tends to do, it will become easier for more and more people to be able to use it.
Okay, now before you had this title here, you were also the global head of IBM Sustainability Software. Yeah. So explain how that role helped kind of prepare you for where you are now.
Yeah, so I came to IBM about 3 years ago, and I started we essentially built the brand around sustainability software. So the idea being that our technology can help support different sustainability use cases, as I mentioned. So everything from the energy efficiency of your buildings to data management for reporting to, the predictive health and maintenance monitors that I mentioned, to we used to own the weather company, and so we had access to the weather data, and using that to be able to identify, what's going to happen with extreme weather, how might that affect your supply chain, a lot of that mitigation adaptation to what's happening around the world. So this idea that we can leverage technology in a way that supports different sustainable use cases was something that we felt we can build off of. Now it's actually, I want to say we want to horizontalize it. Is that a word? Where we're thinking about this not as something that's around sustainability, if you will, but again, it's just good business. And so how do we inject that around the businesses? So I do think that coming from that lens has been really powerful, because we've been able to see, and I've been able to learn how our own technology can support here. We do a lot of what we call client zero. So we use, if you want to say, drink our own champagne, we use our own technology to support a lot of what we're doing internal to the organization. However, on top of that, we are, for me, really, again, embedding this as part of how we think about our business rather than as a standalone goal. And coming from the business itself has been really helpful to understand how to better do that.
Okay, before we wrap things up, if you could just have a crystal ball, what do you see looking ahead? Everything changes just so fast.
Yeah.
What are you thinking of, let's say, 5-10 years from now?
Yeah, look, this space is changing, even from a year ago, right? Even from a couple months ago, it's changing so dramatically. I mentioned before that we're seeing so much more computing power and ability and capacity to do more with a lot less. And I think that delta will continue to expand even further. And really, for me, a lot of it is focused on innovation, right? I think some of the use cases I shared with you around the geospatial foundation models, about what we're doing with cosmetics, what we're doing with bridges. how this affects factories, the ability and the opportunity for truly transformative applications of this will only continue to increase. And I think if we think about not just AI, but I mentioned briefly about quantum, just the ability for technology to be even more transformative. I mean, it's already been transformative in a generation, but even more transformative in terms of how we think about our day-to-day lives and what it'll affect going forward will be pretty incredible. So,
Christina, thank you.
Thank you so much.